something are really connected in terms of kids who may be acting out or, kind of behaving in ways that we don't really know how to handle in our classrooms. And it's because they don't, like I said, they just don't have as much practice kind of dealing with their emotions in situations at school, at church, at any place that isn't their house. So some of the problems, these two are really connected, and some of the problems that we might be seeing in this context are dealing with negative feelings, like feeling angry at someone, feeling sad, feeling disappointed, frustrated, all sorts of negative emotions. Dealing with conflict. So what do I do when something bad happens? Being respectful to other people when they don't want to. Controlling their impulses, following rules, and listening to directions. So these are all sorts of things that come from these skills that kids might have had less experience with. And so we might be seeing more of these problems in our classes. And so I don't know what's next, actually. Hold on. Okay, so the first thing that I wanted to talk a bit about was just kind of helping kids to understand their emotions a little bit more. Has anyone seen this movie Inside Out? Yeah, so this movie does a great job just explaining how emotions can be really overwhelming for kids. So we're all adults here. We all have a pretty good understanding and control of our emotions. But kids aren't like that. Kids, their emotions are a lot more confusing, a lot more overwhelming, and a lot harder to deal with. Oh, okay. So one reason that we may see kids acting differently in our classroom is because they are having a harder time dealing with the normal emotions that kids deal with every single day. So this might mean that they're being shy because they are having a harder time dealing with the feeling of anxiety about talking to someone else. We may see that they're acting out because they're having a harder time dealing with anger that happens in normal situations. Or we may see that kids cry more often than we're used to them seeing because they have a harder time dealing with sadness. All sorts of emotions need practice for kids to get better at dealing with them, and these kids have had less practice. And so when kids don't understand their emotions, this is when we see things like confusion, frustration, aggression, and acting out. And so what we want to do is we want to help kids understand their emotions a little bit more. And we can do this through something called emotion coaching. And this is something that I was taught how to do this in my training, and it's something that we know is the number one way to help kids bring down their emotions from like 100, like if they're feeling an emotion at level 100, it can help it come down to like a 70 or a 60 or a 50. And that's when we're able to kind of deal with the situation because we're not crying, we're not screaming, we're not scared. We're just feeling a little bit better. And the point of this is to help kids understand what they're feeling and why they're feeling this way, and to help them feel understood. And there's actually a lot of research that tells us that when we do this, kids' stress levels come down a lot. Just by feeling understood, they can go from feeling really, really, really stressed out to feeling a little bit better. Their heart rate goes down, their blood pressure goes down, and their stress levels go down just when they feel like an adult that they trust understands them. So the reason I really wanted to talk about this is kind of, it's like the best way to deal with emotions in the moment before you end up with a big blow-up situation that is much harder to handle. Not only kids, you're right. We're talking about kids today. Different story with adults. Next, yeah. So I don't think anyone can see that, so I'm just going to talk about it. Yes.
So somebody asked, can you show us how to do that in a very short period of time because we don't have that much time in Sunday school and Saturday activities.
Okay. Yeah, so that's exactly what I'm going to try to do now. So let me know if this is helpful. But it's sorry for the people on Zoom. I keep forgetting about this microphone. It's helpful to think about this as 3 steps. Step 1 is just to pay attention to the situation and gather information about what's going on. So you want to notice And what signals is the kid giving off that suggests how they're feeling. So one example might be if you're a servant who serves in gym and you notice that there's a kid stomping their feet when they missed a soccer goal, that's kind of something could happen or something is going on that may give this kid. And so some other signals are like you see a kid like clenching their fists. Small kids do that a lot when they're angry. You see a kid kind of going off by themselves, crying or avoiding talking to other kids. These are all signals that they might be feeling something they don't really know what to do with it. Step 2 is to go to the kid and try to label the specific emotions that they're feeling. So this would be going up to this kid and saying, you look like you're feeling really angry right now. And sometimes you might be wrong, but a kid will usually tell you when you're wrong. And I can tell you that in a lot of practice at doing this, you're very rarely wrong because you're much better at understanding this kind of stuff than the kid is. And so based on the information that you gather, you can usually form a guess. Maybe they're not feeling angry, but maybe they're just feeling disappointed or frustrated or something like that. And it's really helpful for you to tell them, like, is this what's going on? And to help them understand that. And then step 3, which is the most important step of this process, is to show that you understand the emotion and the reason behind the emotion. So for example, I understand that you're angry because you missed the soccer goal. That must have been really, really annoying. The most important part of this is that you don't have to agree with the reason why the kid is upset. The most important thing is to show the kid that you recognize why they're upset and acknowledge it. And so, because this is the part that's really going to make them feel understood, it's going to help them feel like their emotion makes sense, and it's going to break their stress down. I'm sure everyone here can think of a time when you were feeling annoyed, stressed, angry, and you were telling someone about it, and they were like, well, come on, that's not really a reason to be upset. Calm down. And I'm sure everyone can think of a time when that made you feel more stressed instead of less stressed. And that's what happens with kids. So if you have a kid who's already at like an 80, and you tell them this is not a reason to be upset.
تشيك ذا ويتنج روم لان في ناس عمال يقول ان
Waiting room.
It's hard to deal with this.
مفيش waiting room.
So we want to bring it down by helping them understand that their emotions make sense in the situation. So for servants who serve really young kids, it might be something like I understand you're upset because you got a blue cup instead of a red cup, and that's not what you wanted. And it seems silly, but that's kind of, it helps the kid understand their own emotions because you, as an adult who understand family, understand their emotions. For older kids, it might be something else, like I understand you're upset because your friend didn't like your Instagram. It doesn't make sense to you, but it's what's really important to them, and it's the reason they're upset. And something else I wanted to say about this is that we know emotional coaching is the first step, but if the child has crossed the line and they've done something that's unacceptable, we don't want to ignore them. So we want to do emotional coaching, but we also want to make sure that if they've done something inappropriate, there are consequences. But there is a very important point here that if, say in this situation, I say, I understand that you're angry because you missed the soccer goal and that's really annoying to you. I might follow that up by saying, and it's still very unacceptable that you kicked your friend. And so this is the consequence that you have to face. Because the point here is we want kids to feel like their emotions are real and valid and we understand them. But those emotions should not lead to these actions. And we want to separate that so that they learn that emotions should be dealt with differently, not with these actions. And that's how they learn that I can feel this way, but when I feel this way, I can't act this way. That's an unacceptable way to act. Because the alternative is to try to get rid of the emotion, and we know that that doesn't work. So we want to separate the emotion from the action and teach them more acceptable actions when they're feeling negative emotions.
Just want to highlight something important here that we to our children and taught us is that what we're saying here is that actions and situations will not dictate us, right? So we need to handle it, we need to manage it example, something learned when I say, how does this make you feel versus how do you feel about this? Right, correct?
Yeah.
Elaborate. The difference between how does this make you feel and how do you feel about it?
So I think what you're getting at, correct me if I'm wrong, that our feelings and our actions are connected, but they're also separate. So we often talk about how we can't really control the way that situations make us feel, but we can control the way we respond to situations. And to bring it kind of back to the point that we're making, kids this is another kind of thing that kids learn through experience. So the more situations that kids have where they feel a certain way, and then they act by yelling, screaming, or crying, the more they learn that this is the way things work. Like this is, I'm sad, I cry. I'm angry, I punch. I'm disappointed, I leave. But what we want them to learn is that they have more options. They have a say in the way they respond to these situations. So we want them to see that there are more options and that, you know, your feelings are real, but your actions are up to you. So we want to separate that a little bit. So after we usually want to talk to problem solving, which is what I'm going to talk about in a second. But some other tips that I wanted to talk about for emotions are when we deliver lessons, it's really a good idea to try to talk about emotions in lessons so kids learn how people in the Bible dealt with emotions. Those are really our role models. So things like, can you imagine how David was feeling in this situation? Like his best friend's father was trying to kill him. What emotions do you think he's feeling? And then how did he deal with them? Because here we see examples of how emotions were dealt with positively and even sometimes negatively in the Bible, and we can see the consequences of that. Another thing to do is to label our own emotions so kids see how we deal with our emotions. So if I'm delivering a lesson and the kids are a disaster, I might say something like, I'm feeling very frustrated right now because no one is listening to me. And then I will model how I deal with that frustration so kids see that's how an adult should deal with frustration. And then another one is to help kids understand other kids' emotions. And this is something that's very hard for kids, so they need a lot of help from us. When you notice things are going on between kids, it's really helpful to step in and help them see each other's point of view, which I'm going to talk about again a little bit later. But an example of this might be like if you're in gym and you see one kid is left out, you might say like, it looks like Angela's feeling sad because no one has asked her to play the game. Can you imagine how you would feel if you were in Angela's situation right now? Let's think about what we can do to make Angela feel better. So just really incorporating talk about emotions into lots of different situations, because this is something kids really need to get better at. Any questions about emotions before I move on? Okay, can you go to the next slide?
Do they have any questions? Any questions about emotions? Put it in the chat.
Okay, so the next kind of skill that I wanted to talk about is problem solving. So once we brought emotions down, we usually want to help kids solve problems. And one thing that we know that kids have trouble with is going through what we call the steps. So we're all adults, we go through problems every day of our lives, and we solve them in the way that we know how to, and we kind of want. But kids don't really go through the process of problem solving the way we say. What happens with kids is they have a problem and they react. So we often see them make lots of choices that affect other people, things that can harm others, or that they don't actually want to act that way, but they react that way. And so one thing that we know is helpful is to actually break problem solving into steps for kids. So this is an acronym that we use a lot. It's called HOST. And it breaks it into 4 steps so you can kind of see what actually goes on when we problem solve. Step 1 is to identify the problem. Step 2 is to come up with options. Step 3, and the pros and cons of each option is a very important part of this step. Step 3 is to pick a solution based on your list. And then step 4 is to try it. And if it doesn't work, try something else. Now, if you think about this, you might think this is kind of like really simple. wake up late for work one day, you might go through this really quickly in your head. Like, if I'm late for work, I might, my boss might get mad at me. So what are my options? I can skip breakfast. I can call my boss and say I'm late. I can just be late and accept the consequences. I can ask my husband or my wife to drive my kids to school so that I'm not late. You go through all these options in your head, and whichever one makes the most sense to you, and then you do it. Kids don't always do this. Kids sometimes just pick one option. They don't think about the pros and cons, and they just act. And so breaking problem solving into steps like this, when we're talking to kids about problems, is a good way to help them through the process. Now, for really young kids, they're going to need help with every single one of these steps. They're going to need your help figuring out what the problem is. You're going to have to tell them what their options are. You're going to have to help them pick a solution and then try it. For older kids, you want to help them do it. So maybe you just help them come up with options and list the pros and cons. And maybe you let them pick things on their own, but you have to kind of guide them through this process as well. And so an example of this, to go back to our example from our classroom, if our problem was that the girl in my class wanted to be Moses and she didn't get picked and she was feeling angry, we might start with some emotion coaching there just to kind of bring the emotion down. But then we would want to come up with some options. So some options in this situation are, I can yell at my servant, but I would get in trouble. I wouldn't get to participate. I wouldn't get to be Moses, and that would be rude. So we have kind of like 3 cons in this situation. Another option is to leave the classroom. You would get in trouble. You wouldn't get to participate and be Moses. So you have, it's a better option, but it's still not good. You could take another role. So I wouldn't get to be Moses, but I would get to participate and I wouldn't get in trouble. So we have some pros here, 2 pros. And then you would pick the best solution. So in this case, it seems like the best solution is I would get to participate if I picked another role and I wouldn't get in trouble. And then you try it out and maybe you actually have fun because you tried to participate and you enjoyed the exercise. So it's not this straightforward, and I'm not suggesting that you need to go through these steps with kids, but I think it's very helpful to think of these steps in your mind when a kid is dealing with a problem, just so you can kind of guide them through coming up with other ideas, figuring out what the best solution is, and then doing something about it. Because this is not something that kids do naturally when they're young. They need lots and lots and lots and lots of practice doing this until they get really good at it. Any questions about problem solving? Yeah. Yeah. So the question was, do you ever come across a situation where kids are being really stubborn and they don't want to pick a good solution? They just want to pick one that like maybe will still have negative consequences. Yeah. And so in that case, like sometimes it's good to let kids choose, you know, a not good option because then they get to see the consequences of their actions and they learn. But sometimes as a servant, we are going to have to step in and say, you know, like in this situation, this is really not okay. And so we're going to have to try something else. Can you pick something else? And the best part of problem solving is that you want it to be the child's choice. You want them to kind of reach these conclusions by themselves so that they learn to problem solve. Because I think a lot of servants have experienced like, you know, kids have problems and the first thing they do is they come to you. They don't try to fix it on their own. This happens a lot. And so we really want to help them develop problem solving skills that they use by themselves. But sometimes it's not fun. We don't want them to be hurting other kids, disrupting class or other things that are just not okay. But that happens a lot, yeah. Okay, and then the last thing that I wanted to just cover was social skills. So this was the one that I think most people in the chat, as you mentioned too. Social skills covers a lot of things. So some of the stuff I have here is like taking turns when you're playing a game or even in class, approaching other kids to make friends or make conversation, making eye contact, perspective taking, so understanding other kids' point of view, Raising your hand, smiling, sharing, listening, cooperating, good manners, and following instructions. These are all social skills that kids, they have to practice to get good at them. We have kids who are born with really, really good manners, and that's great. But we still need to help kids practice a lot of these skills for it to become more
There's a
natural.
comment.
Oh, is there a question?
No, there's a comment. So in the chat, Tante Hannah specified that up to grade 4, that's when you guide them through the problem solving skills. After that, they should be able to do it on their own or be more independent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you good?
And so one thing for social skills coaching, one thing that I'm sure everyone already does, because this is kind of part of our role as servants, is to be a good role model and model good social skills. And so this can be through planned activities, through lessons and plays and things that we do in the classroom, where we intentionally kind of build in skills like manners or perspective taking or turn taking. But it can also be natural in the way that we just act around kids. So it's especially important to say things like please and thank you every single time you do something or you give them something, or to show them like how do you start a conversation. I might want to go up to a kid and be like, what did you do this weekend? What was fun? What did you do with your family? And kind of show them this is how you make friends. Another thing to do with kids is to praise kids who show good social skills. And something really important that I learned recently about praise is that it can never be general or vague. When you're doing praise, you always want to do something called specific labeled praise. And this is how kids learn exactly what it is that they did well and what they need to do again. So examples of this are, Marina, thank you so much for holding the door for everyone. That was so nice of you. Instead of just saying, thank you, Marina, that was nice. Or, Joe, I really liked how you asked Andrew if he wanted to play basketball with you. Instead of saying, Joe, that was really friendly. You want to specifically say what they did well, because this is going to help that kid, so Marina and Joe, learn what they did well, but it's also going to show all the other kids what they should do to show good social skills as well. Yeah.
We need to really say, stop doing such and such. Again, it tells them
Exactly.
So Bhuta just said that even when we say stop, we need to be specific as to stop what, so that they know what they're stopping.
Yeah, so being specific both ways is really helpful because we expect kids to understand what we mean, but they don't. A lot of the time they don't, and it's not fair for us to always expect that they will. And another thing so Bhuta mentioned that like you want to say stop doing this negative thing. And another thing that I've found is really helpful in class is like if one kid is sitting so nicely and you want all the other kids to do the exact same thing as them, I might say like, Daniel, you are sitting exactly the way I want you to sit right now. And in that moment, every kid looks at Daniel and says, oh, that's what I need to be doing right now. And so they will copy Daniel. And the last thing that I wanted us to talk about is creating opportunities for social skills practice. So this is something that's going to look very, very different in every single class because all of your kids are at different ages. So I just put up some ideas here about how we can purposefully create ways that kids practice. So for example, practicing turn taking, instead of just picking kids who raise their hand, have activities where every single kid in the classroom has to participate and every kid has to wait everyone else's turn before they get to go. So maybe go around the whole room and everyone shares one thing. Cooperation and teamwork. We really want to focus on activities where kids have to work together and not against each other. So things like boys versus girls is okay, but the bigger the team, the better, because we want kids to learn to work with all sorts of different kids, not just their best friend. And the more kids they work with, the better they get at dealing with different kinds of people. Another one is to be a social bridge. And this is kind of like what I was mentioning earlier. Like, we know kids don't really have the skills to make friends right now, so we can step in and help. So if I know this kid and this kid might have basketball in common. I might sit in the middle of that and I will say, oh, did you have basketball practice recently? What have you been doing in basketball practice? I know he also plays basketball. What do you do in basketball practice? And you want to build a bridge of conversation and eventually take yourself out. Because kids are having a hard time talking. I can speak to this. I was telling Luna and Snack, kids are not talking to each other during snack. They're just sitting by themselves and it's kind of sad. And so I really feel like we need to help them start conversations and make friends because they're very lonely a lot of the time. And then the last one is perspective taking. So this was similar to what I said before, but when we see kids have conflict together, we can actually take them out and help them figure out what happened between the two of them. So if two kids are fighting, I might do something like take them out of the classroom and say, can you please tell them what you were feeling in this moment and what your point of view is? And can you tell them what your point of view is? Did you know that this is what was happening for this other person? And did you know that this is how they were feeling? Because this is how kids learn that other people have different points of views than themselves. Because this is not something that's easy for them. They really just focus on their own point of view. So we need to help them see that other kids are different than them and that they experience things differently. So this is one way to help them build that skill. That's all that I wanted to say. I think we've gone a bit over time, so I don't know. I don't know if we should do it.
I just really want to thank Brett. Thank you so much. It's very unfortunate, very disappointing that many of the servers are not like neither online or in person. Thank you. I think we have close to 20 servants online. Thank you for those who are coming. But thank you so much, Brett. I think it's really hands-on. Sometimes we say like we don't have enough topics for hands-on, but so Murat is going to be continuing with us February 6th, the second half of this. I think are you going to give them homework to do for next session?
I was gonna give them some sheets to think about.
Okay, so she's going to give you homework.
I wouldn't call it homework. Buna, you're trying to get them not to like.
Can you summarize
Maybe you
the
will think
topics?
that's the homework.
Because I think the online missed the topics.
What are the topics?
Like you said, the 3 series. Like what you
Oh.
So somebody asked if this could be once a month. Oh, so somebody said every 2 weeks is too much. But we will look into it. I'm gonna stop the recording. Are we recording? Oh my God, I was gonna request it. But before we stop the recording, I wanted
And also, I spoke to Murat about this.
you to talk about the series.
We're gonna have the same session or like slightly different for parents. Okay, so there's gonna be a parenting in the parenting group meeting that's gonna be that we used to do every other Saturday. So we'll have that as well. So because I think you might be sitting here like this is good information for parents as well. So this will take place also coming up for parents. But I'll leave it for Murat now to give you that you're gonna think. You're gonna have to think. We're gonna give them a
Can she
homework
just
to think.
summarize what we'll do next week before I
Yeah.
stop the recording?
So the next session is today we focused on skills that every kid has had a hard time developing. Next time we're going to talk about specific mental health concerns that we might see some of the kids having more of. So we'll talk a little bit about anxiety, talk a little bit about what it might look like when kids are feeling more depressed than usual, and we're going to talk about how COVID has impacted kids' faith. So why it might be harder for kids to have the kind of carefree, innocent faith that we're used to them having in our service. So the sheets that I was talking about was, I thought we would have time for like groups. We could sit in groups. I don't think we have time for that, but I can give everyone a sheet that kind of touches on, based on the age group that you serve. I highlighted three things that you might notice in the kids that age. So we have something for angels, JKSK 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6. And that kind of make what we talked about today a little bit more specific. So you can think about how these skills apply to the kids that you serve specifically.
Stop the sharing.